and in particular, the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline, the executive orders banning oil and gas drilling on federal lands. Those executive orders are nothing short of heartless. And it is really important, we want to make sure, particularly for a state like mine, that the administration understands the impact of those kinds of orders. The extent to which when you ban new permits for fossil fuel exploration on public lands, it kills economies, it kills jobs, it means that we don't have funding for our schools. And it is important for the American people to understand and recognize that no matter what you're hearing from this administration, what they are doing is a war on the West, and it is a war on the American worker. People are losing their jobs, they're losing their livelihoods, and we as Republicans are committed to turning that around. We are committed to standing against those policies, to making sure that we are able to get access to our fossil fuels, and making sure that we're able to bring jobs back and get our economy growing as we come back from the devastation of COVID. I want to say just one more thing before I turn things over to Mr. Smith. Today is the 30th anniversary of the beginning of the ground war in Desert Storm. It began on February 24th, 1991. And I want everybody today to take a minute to remember those brave Americans who fought in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, the brave Americans who led us then, and just commemorate the fact that it was 30 years ago today. It was a 100-hour ground war, and my colleague, Ms. Stefanik's, got a resolution. I hope we will have bipartisan support for that resolution to commemorate the victory and the sacrifice of those people who fought in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. With that, I will turn things over to my colleague from the Budget Committee, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Liz. It's very simple. We're here today because Pelosi, Schumer, and Biden decided to use a pandemic to push forward a progressive wish list items to reward political allies, friends, and donors at the expense of the American working class. If this package was clearly about crushing the virus, then why is less than 9% of all total spending actually used to put shots in people's arms? If this package was clearly about making sure that schools opened, why is it that less than 5% of all spending for schools will only be spent this year? If this package was about creating more jobs, why is it that this package spends more than 25%, according to the Congressional Budget Office, on items that kills millions of jobs? If this package was not a progressive wish list, why does it spend hundreds of millions of dollars on pet projects in New York City and in San Francisco, like bridges and trailways? If this package was truly about helping all Americans, why did they change the bipartisan budget formula used in all the other COVID packages to reward the blue state governors? One governor that's being recalled and another governor that hid disclosure of how many deaths that were in nursing homes. They're clearly rewarding their friends, their donors, and their partisan agenda. This is the wrong plan at the wrong time for all the wrong reasons. I yield back.
Well done.
Now I'd like to yield to our whip, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you. House Republicans have consistently fought to help those hardworking families that are struggling, whether they're trying to get back to work, trying to have their businesses reopened, or whether they're demanding that their kids be taught in the classroom. Those are the things that we've been fighting for, as well as to fight to get more vaccines in the arms of people. Unfortunately, that's not what we're going to be voting on this week. That's not what this $1.9 trillion liberal wish list giveaway bill does. And that's why we're strongly opposing it. And we're also pushing to expose just what is really in this bill. You know, back during Obamacare, Speaker Pelosi famously said, you've got to pass the bill to find out what's in it. You know, people are starting to find out what's in this bill, and they're also finding out what's not in this bill. They know that this bill does not dedicate real money to reopen schools. In fact, the press secretary for President Biden admitted that over the weekend, that the $130+ billion going to school doesn't even have to be used to safely reopen schools. Even the CBO pointed out more than 95% of that money won't even be spent this year. Parents don't want to wait another year to have their kids safely in the classroom. In fact, the science strongly says that schools need to be reopened, can safely be reopened, and points out the damage, long-term damage being done to our nation's children if they're not in the classroom. Estimates are that only about 40% of America's students are learning in the classroom every day. That means tens of millions of students are not getting the same educational opportunities. That's not something that's just going to last with them these next few weeks. That's something that could last and hold them back the rest of their lives. We owe it to those children to open schools, and this bill ought to be focused on opening schools. And unfortunately, Democrats have pushed against those measures to do it. You know, we had amendments in committee to do things like ensure that we can reopen schools. Ensure that, by the way, we had an amendment to say let's go not to 100 million vaccinations in the first 100 days of Biden's presidency, but to go to 200 million vaccinations. Every Democrat voted against that amendment. How can you call it COVID relief when you oppose the measures to actually increase vaccinations against COVID? Just the other day, President Biden challenged Republicans to show him the waste. What would you cut, President Biden said. My response to President Biden would be, how much time do you have, Mr. President, to go through the litany of things in this bill that have nothing to do with COVID? Who said a subway to Silicon Valley has anything to do with COVID? Who said a $15 minimum wage that estimates show would kill over $50 billion in economic activity and jobs in America has anything to do with COVID? Who says a state bailout of $350 billion to blue states like California? California in this bill would get over $40 billion in bailout money when they just announced they have a $10 billion surplus. So why, Mr. President, would you want to borrow money from our children and grandchildren to bail out failed states and to keep schools closed for another year when the science says open schools today? So my challenge to President Biden would be work with Republicans to actually help families who are struggling, to reopen small businesses, to get kids back in the classroom, not one day a week in 6 months, but today. The science says they can do it. The will is there. And by the way, there are tens of billions of dollars already passed in previous bipartisan bills to safely reopen schools. That's where the focus should be. Unfortunately, this bill falls far flat of those objectives, and that's why we strongly oppose it. Let's fight for those families. Let's help those kids get back in school, and let's defeat this virus working together. And with that, now I'll bring up our leader, Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you, Steve. I want to thank the Republican leader of the budget, Jason Smith, for his work and his committee's work on this. You've watched us in the last year 5 times come together in a bipartisan way for the American public. It is now all changed. It is now a partisan route. I think all Americans agree exactly what Republicans wanted to have happen. We want to go back to work, back to school, back to health. Unfortunately, this bill is too costly, too corrupt, and too liberal. Only 9% goes to COVID. We watched the swamp come back to Washington. $100 million for a tunnel in Silicon Valley just outside of Speaker Pelosi's district. Or a bridge for Schumer. Or money for schools that 2/3 of it cannot be spent until 2023. This is the wrong path, and this is not what President Biden said he would do at the inaugural. Republicans want to work together as we have before, but unfortunately the times have changed here. We believe in accountability. We believe in spending money when it comes to COVID. I've watched what they do here. This seems like a payout for those who agree with them politically. That's a corrupt system, and that's wrong. The American public deserve better, and that's exactly what Republicans will propose. With that, let's take questions. Yes, ma'am.
Are your concerns with Speaker Pelosi's setup of the January 6th commission as it's been proposed to you?
Well, it'd be the same concerns that those who were on the 9/11 Commission who led it with Hamilton and Kane. If you listen to their own words, Speaker Pelosi is doing it all wrong. First, it's not bipartisan, 7-4. Secondly, they don't allow subpoena power for the minority and the majority to work together. I mean, I would take those two leaders who I hold in high esteem, a Democrat and a Republican, who carried out a 9/11 commission, who did it in a manner that people trusted coming out. I mean, when I look at the first actions the Speaker has taken with their own general to look at what has went on, and you look at his tweets and others, it seems most of this is politically driven, and it seems like she's setting up a system to fail. And that's not from my words. Those are from those who headed up the 9/11 Commission.
Proposal.
Mine was very clear, 3 simple things. It has to be equal, 50-50, Republican, Democrat appointed. It has to be equal, just like on 9/11, the power of subpoenas, of which way we go.
Congresswoman Haney said yesterday that she believes that the 9/11 Commission should, the 9/11 style commission should investigate the extent to which the president and others pushed this idea that the election was stolen. Do you agree with her on that?
I wouldn't predetermine what to do. I've been very clear about after January 6th that we came out first with the 9/11 Commission, just as Hamilton and Kane has said in a clear way. It's only Speaker Pelosi who's trying to make this thing partisan and others.
House Democrats want to bring back earmarks. I wonder your thoughts on that, and can you get your conference to support it since House Republicans right now don't?
I know the Democrats had said that in the last Congress as well. I haven't seen anything new. Anytime someone would approach that, they'd have to bring new accountability to it. We'd look at it that nature, but until that time, we wouldn't take anything up until we see what they're proposing.
Leader?
Yes.
Equality Act, I just wanted to ask you about. Democrats want it passed. Senate Republicans say that it's only an attack. It's not only an attack on girls and women's sports, but also attack on churches, opening them up for possible lawsuits of discrimination.
Very clear. I mean, if you look at Biden's appointments to cabinet members, suing nuns and others, this really seems like an onslaught against freedom of religion. Girls' sports as well and others. And now the Democrats have even taken it further. Can you imagine being an elected member of Congress, putting your name on a letter to a cable industry telling them what they should have on their shows? Or sending it to Amazon that created a company based upon selling books, telling them not to sell books in America, and that you're a member of Congress. Interesting to me of how far they have gone and how much further they want to go. Yes, sir. How are you today?
Most of you are going to see a 2-minute commercial break. We have a 10-minute warning for that news conference out of Boston, Massachusetts, everybody. Breaking news this morning.